In the shadows of every city, behind every locked door, lies a story waiting to be told. Welcome to Dark Justice, where we uncover the darkest crimes, the mysteries that haunt history, and the minds of those who dared to defy the law. We will dive into solved cases, cold mysteries, and the chilling truths behind criminal legends. This is not just storytelling. This is where crime meets justice, and every detail matters. Subscribe, stay alert, and step into the darkness with us, because the story is just beginning. It was the crime that stunned Britain. In the early hours of August 8th, 1963, a Royal Mail train carrying millions of pounds in cash thundered through the English countryside. But ahead on the track, the signal lights turned red. The train braked to a halt, and in that moment, a gang of masked men carried out one of the most audacious robberies in history. No guns were fired, no one was killed, yet £2.6 million, worth over £50 million today, vanished into the night. The Great Train Robbery became a legend. For some, it was the ultimate crime caper. For others, it was a brutal attack on Britain's sense of security. But behind the daring heist lies a story of meticulous planning, betrayal, and a dramatic downfall that would haunt the men forever. The 1960s were a time of change in Britain, a country shifting from post-war austerity into modern prosperity. But with progress came opportunity, and criminals were watching. Trains were still the backbone of the nation's cash transport system. Every night, the Royal Mail moved money from banks across the country to London, sometimes carrying millions in banknotes. The security was minimal. Armed guards were rare. Few believed anyone would dare stop a moving train. But one man thought differently. Bruce Reynolds, a charismatic London career criminal, had spent years planning the ultimate score. He and his associates knew if they struck the right train at the right time, they could walk away with a fortune. The target was chosen. The Glasgow to London Royal Mail train, scheduled for August 8, 1963. Inside its second carriage would be stacked mail bags filled with old banknotes being returned to the Bank of England. The haul was estimated at £1 million. The gang assembled was a mix of hardened criminals and specialists, 15 men in all. Among them were Gordon Goody, Buster Edwards, and Roger Caudry. Each had a role. Each knew this was no small-time job. The key to success was precision. A retired train driver, known as Stan the engine driver, was recruited to help them learn how to operate the locomotive once it was stopped. They studied the route, timed the journey, and prepared false signals to bring the train to a halt. This was not a smash and grab. It was a military-style operation. At 3 a.m. on August 8th, the Royal Mail train approached Ledburn, near Cheddington in Buckinghamshire. In the darkness, the gang had tampered with the railway signals, switching the green lights to red. The driver, Jack Mills, slowed the train and brought it to a stop. In moments, the quiet countryside erupted into chaos. The gang swarmed the locomotive. Mills was struck on the head and subdued. The second driver, David Whitby, was tied up. With the train under their control, the robbers uncoupled the mail carriages carrying the cash and moved them forward to a waiting truck parked on a nearby bridge. For 30 minutes, the men formed a chain, unloading 120 mailbags stuffed with notes. When they were finished, £2.6 million had been stolen, the largest haul in British history. The gang escaped to a rented farmhouse at Leatherslade in Buckinghamshire, just a few miles from the scene. Here, they hid the money and celebrated their success. For a brief moment, it seemed they had pulled off the perfect crime. But perfection requires discipline, and discipline began to crack. The plan had been to leave quickly, but the men stayed too long. Newspapers blared headlines about the robbery, and the police launched the largest manhunt the country had ever seen. At the hideout, fingerprints were left behind on bottles, playing cards, and even the Monopoly board the robbers used to pass the time. These small traces would later become key evidence. Britain was in shock. This wasn't just a theft, it was a direct challenge to the establishment. Public opinion was divided. Some admired the daring of the robbers. Others demanded justice for the attack on train staff. Scotland Yard launched an enormous investigation. Thousands of officers combed the countryside, raiding homes, interviewing suspects, and tracking down stolen money. The pressure was relentless. Within weeks, the net began to close. Informants whispered names, evidence mounted, and soon the first arrests were made. By 1964, most of the gang had been captured. The trial took place at Aylesbury, and the courtroom was packed with reporters. The sentences shocked the nation. 11 of the robbers received terms of up to 30 years in prison, unprecedented for a crime in which no one was killed. The government wanted to send a message. This kind of lawlessness would not be tolerated. But the story didn't end there. In 1965, Ronnie Biggs, one of the robbers, escaped from prison, climbing over a wall with a rope ladder. He fled abroad, eventually surfacing in Brazil, where he became an international fugitive celebrity for decades before finally returning to Britain in 2001. The Great Train Robbery entered legend almost immediately. Books, films, and endless tabloid stories turned the criminals into folk heroes, rebels who had taken on the system and, for a time, won. But the reality was darker. Jack Mills, the train driver who was struck during the robbery, never fully recovered from his injuries. He died just a few years later. Many of the robbers spent most of their lives behind bars. Some never saw freedom again. For Britain, the robbery was a turning point. Security on trains was overhauled. The police gained new powers. And the idea of the romantic criminal was forever entangled with this heist. Even today, the Great Train Robbery remains one of the most famous crimes in British history. A tale of ambition, greed, and the ultimate price of chasing fortune. The men thought they had stolen their future, but in the end, the Great Train Robbery stole theirs.